Making sense of specialized engineering knowledge is not easy. A majority of the technical know-how is actually learned informally on the job and by doing. If you're fortunate enough, you've had an incredible mentor who's shown you the tricks of the trade. If not, don't worry about it, because this podcast will serve as your own personal tribe of mentors. In each episode, we will extract tribal knowledge from top engineering and manufacturing leaders to help you on your journey. There's really no way of knowing what information you're going to need around the next corner of your career. So let grinding gears be your guide. Hello, welcome back for part 2 of this conversation with Steve Rader, who's the Deputy Director of Crowdsource Innovation at NASA, and Yehya ElMaraghi, who was the former lean practitioner at SpaceX. So we left off the last conversation with Steve kind of giving some guidance for how companies can get started leveraging the crowd, the gig economy, and freelance marketplaces. And we got into some really insightful back and forth between Steve and Yehya. So we'll pick up right where we left off. Great. Yehya, do you have anything to kind of add to that? Did you guys at any point in your experience leverage the crowd and use independent consultants and freelancers for very specialized needs? And then how'd you go about finding them?
So yeah, I have a couple of follow-ups on that, but just to answer a question, nothing to my knowledge that we went outside to get help on. However, I want to actually point to the crowdsourcing capability. When Steve was talking, I want to ask him, how does that work for a company that's not necessarily SpaceX, but sometimes you need the person working on your problem to be very familiar with the product, and you can't, and that takes some time, and you can't really give him full access. So how did, I'm asking this from my own learning. How can we do that? How can we get somebody to be familiar with our product or to be an insider, if you will, when we're just opening it to the public?
Sure. Well, and this gets into how do you scope what you're going to take to the crowd and how do you use the crowd, right? Because say for a challenge, we don't recommend taking all of your problem out. We recommend really finding a limited side of it, like the mechanical design, or how do I make this one component lighter or more reliable, or how do I solve this problem? And that way, there's not a whole lot of context, because that is the hard piece. It's the engineers that work within the core. They have to really be looking at how do I balance lots of competing priorities, right? How do I make this light enough and reliable enough? And they're putting together that story. Now, if you say need to bring in an expert in, say, computational fluid mechanics, or somebody who's really big into machine learning because you want to leverage that on your problem, and they're going to have to learn a lot of context. Well, that's where you might want to reach out to one of these freelance crowds where they have every expertise you can imagine, and people within, because you're talking sometimes hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that they have access to. And so they can find that niche skill, and you can actually bring them on board for just the time and effort that you need, right? So then you can spend some time explaining the problem, getting them trained up on what you need, but without actually having to hire somebody full-time forever, right? And you're always, there's a great book out there called Machine Platform Crowd. And it gets into some really interesting stuff about how fast things are moving now. And as soon as you hire somebody full time, they're automatically out of the learning, right? They're now learning about your specific stuff, but they're not keeping up with the state of the art because they're learning about what you're doing. And so having the ability to kind of augment that by people in the crowd, you can always find somebody in the crowd who actually does have the latest and greatest, because that's just the nature of the crowd. There's always somebody that has that. And if you get multiple people, you can actually cover the waterfront across kind of the niche specialties. And so that's where we're looking at the future of work is how do we kind of pull in people for more permanent, and I say more permanent, for longer periods of time to get that context, and then join them up with the people that have that contextual knowledge so that you leverage the best parts of the crowd for what you need. And you're using the core of your organization to do what you're doing best. So if you do a whole lot of something, well, hire that, right? Because then you can combine those two things and then just bring in the skills you need when you need them. But a lot of organizations don't need all the skills all the time. And in fact, one of the characteristics of doing business today is that the number of skills you need to run an organization has gotten so broad that it's impossible to hire everyone who has all the expertise you need. If just look at IT, right? If you were to hire all of the people you really needed, it would be amazing, right? You'd have to have some cyber expert who understood code and all of the vulnerabilities there. You'd have to have a server expert, a networks expert, an expert in how social engineering works and how all those threats work, and you just can't afford that kind of deep expertise in everything. And as soon as you hire them, right, there's already more that they're not learning that's out there. And so how do you, and that's just IT, right? You could go on and on and on. So how do you get all of the expertise you need within a company? Well, you're going to have to offload the pieces that aren't your core and go outside to find those. And it's the freelance world that's probably a good gateway to find that. Now, I really like your hammer and nail analogy because I use that a lot. I tell people all the time, crowdsourcing is a great hammer, but don't use it everywhere, right? It's everything starts to look like you can use crowdsourcing on it, and there are still things that crowdsourcing is not good at, and it's really important to recognize that. But right now, I think we're really finding that there are things that you can use the crowd for that you never would have expected to, and that they're really good at.
And one thing that I want to bring up that we're actually experimenting with at Assist to Develop is, and something new, so kind of unveiling it now. I was kind of, as I was listening, like, do I say this or not? Because it's something that's going to be set to release in the next couple of months. But we're putting together crowdsource challenges for people that are actually looking for freelance or full-time hires. Because our platform, it can be full-time, freelance, or design challenges, right? Freedom, flexibility for organizations to solve the problems that they have. And one of the things that we're doing is there's this big gap, right? There's students graduating college that are complaining that they don't have any tangible skills that they have to use, phrase that. So there's kids coming out of school that are complaining that every job that they're trying to interview for says they need to have X amount of tangible skills and experience. And then companies are kind of complaining about the skills gap in engineering and manufacturing. So one of the ways that we're going to use design challenges to solve that problem is say, okay, company ABC, you're set to hire, 15 people in the next 6 to 9 months. Why don't you put out a crowdsource challenge to these students that are set to graduate, or anyone really out there in the crowd that potentially wants to work for you on a freelance basis or a full-time basis? You put that crowdsource challenge out there, and that's a way that you can vet these candidates and understand, okay, these people potentially have the skill set and the subset that we're looking for. And again, given our platform and the way that it works and the collaborative tools we have integrated, people can truly, like, if you're in Houston and I'm in California and I'm a designer, I can potentially still work on your project remotely if it's not something that's a full-time job, and it can be a freelance contract. So we're even investigating the different ways that crowdsource challenges can come together. So it can be a challenge for cash prizes like most do, but then also can be a crowdsource challenge for a company to try and help vet and find top candidates that want to work for them. And again, I think it was a couple of months ago, the CEO of Rockwell Collins got on CNBC and talked about they had 150 unfilled positions. And it's because they're having a tough time finding talent in this marketplace. So one of the reasons people are turning to the crowd. But again, as Yehya was kind of asking, not everybody is going to turn everything over to the crowd. And Steve, to your point, it's really a matter of identifying what are the things that make sense and what are the things that don't. So we spend time with companies up front to really identify, okay, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? How can it be achieved? And that's where even some of our consultants on our platform and freelancers on our platform can work directly with a company to try and help set that type of stuff up and act as like a project manager or liaison. So that's some of the things that are unique and different that we're doing to, again, really give people an opportunity to try crowdsourcing in a couple different mechanisms.
Yeah, and I think you hit on this in terms of trying to actually find people that you can trust. One of the things that we're seeing more and more in crowds is credentialing, where crowds are starting to actually credential their members so that with high confidence, you can sign an NDA, or you can get them to work on sensitive information, or you can, believe that they're going to be reliable. And one of the things that you see is on these platforms, especially freelance platforms, that they are capturing actually the digital exhaust of work, right? So they actually can capture how, not just, hey, this person has a degree in mechanical engineering, but they can capture this person has worked on these particular tools, on these particular projects. They've delivered on time. They've been rated well on their interactions with the client. They can do this well. They can't do this well. And suddenly you have a really rich way to actually evaluate the resources that you're going to want to put some trust into. If you see that they've worked for 35 different high-level companies on sensitive projects, your doubt that they can actually, keep your secret or be exposed to yours and understand your problem starts to evaporate, right? Because you realize pretty quickly that your employees, even though they're your employees, may or may not be safe to share secrets with too, right? I mean, people are people, and it's really, how do you verify that? I tell people, I think in 10 years, we're going to have young people really laugh at us and say, really, you used to hire people for full-time employment, like every day, all day, for a job that you kind of knew what you wanted them to do, and you did that based on a 30-minute interview or an hour interview and a couple of sheets of paper that told you what classes they took and how well they did in those classes. That's crazy. And it's going to be much more about hiring people based on what they've proven capability, that's much more detailed.
Proof of tangible skills. I mean, Google recently said, hey, look, we're not requiring you to have a college degree anymore. And one of the ways that we were like, okay, how can we solve this problem? Because we understand that, is we partnered with a self-paced online learning tutorial company that's focused on engineering and manufacturing. And they have these tutorials, but the benefit wasn't necessarily the tutorials and the training for us. It was, hey, look, they have these skills assessment tests. If you pass the test, you ascertain a badge that shows, you can click on that badge and it shows this person went through this content, this material, passed the test, shows that tangible proof of knowledge. Now you can have that sort of trust factor. Then once they start completing these projects, hey, look, reviews. You can look at the reviews and say, this is the work that the people have done. And I think the more important point to the people that are the freelancers out there, the people that are looking for work, one of the benefits that you alluded to, Steve, is the fact that, hey, look at my portfolio now. Look at the tangible skills that I have. Look at some of these projects I completed. Yeah, I didn't win the challenge, but look at the projects I completed. And what we're trying to do with our crowd is, again, no matter what happens, if you launch these crowds, like challenges, you had 500 plus submissions for one of the $3,000 challenges you talked about earlier. You still got to go through and vet all that talent, go through all of those different submissions and find the ones that make sense. One of the things that we're thinking about doing too, as a part of this next release, is like, hey, look, with these challenges, maybe you don't have time to go through all of these different reviews, all of these different people. Why don't we have an aggregated crowd of basically mentors in the platform that can review some of these submissions and then provide feedback? And that's where the collaborative stuff comes into our platform. Because again, if you're someone that's looking to level up your game, level up your skills as an independent consultant freelancer, number one, you want to have a portfolio that showcases that. And then number two, if you don't win those challenges, what's some feedback that you can get that says, hey, here's how this is going to improve next time? And to Yahya's point earlier, that helps facilitate some of that training, facilitate some of the stuff that's going to really drive innovation forward. Because then the next time around, that same person competes in that challenge, they're going to say, I learned from the mistakes or learned from some of the things that I didn't necessarily do right based on some feedback that I got. And again, I think this is the collaborative economy that we all everybody keeps talking about, but I think it's really starting to come forward.
Oh, and we're starting to see that these are becoming communities of practice, right? Where the members of the communities are actually trading notes and helping each other, and competing with each other, and asking each other questions about things. So there's a learning, which really, if you think about it, the new economy requires lifelong learning. Like, that's the shift that's got to happen if we're going to stay competitive. And the crowds, that's why people are joining. That's why there are so many people signing up on these sites. It's not just because they want to make money. There's not actually a whole lot of money on some of these sites right now until the industry shifts. But what there is training, and there's this validation and like you say, getting feedback so they can improve. And that's really where the engagement is right now. And then that starts to open the way for real work to happen. And it's exciting to see.
To play the devil's advocate here, or just simply the devil, aren't we seeing like that what we're talking about is morphing into a contracting kind of model, where it's, when you say credentials and you say it's the we look at their biography and their views. So essentially we're looking at like those crowd firms would be almost like a contractor agency, and the freelancer community, where you say, yes, I didn't win, but here's the products I completed, but you did invest some of your time there. And if you didn't win, what was that?
Yeah.
What's the return on that? And are we going to start seeing some starving artist syndrome, where only the top of that community are the ones that are winning, that are making, like, it's like the artists?
Yeah. I would say that is the reaction I get a lot in this conversation. And here's what I say. I say, contests are exactly the same as proposal work. So freelancers have been doing proposals forever, right? It's just a way to show what you can do. And once you have a portfolio, contests probably are not as valuable to you, right? Because your portfolio, your resume will speak for itself. And maybe we'll find ways to build resumes better so that you get this deeper knowledge. But fundamentally, it's easy to get caught up in the prizes and challenges world and say, that's the new economy. The new economy is freelance, and freelance is working for people and doing it where you're actually making money doing what you enjoy. There's a new study out by Edelman that was commissioned by Upwork and the Freelancers Union. And if you look at what the trends are, a lot of freelancers, and you can see the stats in that study, are making more now than when they worked for companies. They are giving feedback that says stuff like, no matter how much more you tried to pay me, I will not go back to a company. They're finding the freedom in what they're doing. Now, it takes time. It takes establishing yourself. It takes doing well, right? But that's the competitive economy. But there's also work at every skill level going on too. So it's not just the people that have machine learning expertise. It's the people that are doing image tagging. There's a great company called Source that's actually going into just different really impoverished areas, and it's places where people have education but no opportunity, and they're basically training them on how to do these really simple tasks that people aren't willing to pay very much in the West, but the little that companies will pay end up being 4 or 5 times what they could make in the slum. And so they're actually starting to pull people out of poverty with this. So a lot of people will say, hey, isn't this an immoral move to move to the freelance economy? I said, well, not really, because if you look at the global effect of it, it's actually bringing a lot more people up. And as those people get more and more wealth, that expands the economy, right? And so if there is this shift, you really want to be in this side anyway in the new economy, because that's the way you can have lifelong learning. That's the way you can actually work your passion. Most large organizations suck the life out of your passion. They actually, people at NASA even, they love what they do, but gosh darn it, they spend most of their time in meetings and in things they don't enjoy. And a lot will tell you, I don't get to do the fun stuff enough. And in the freelance world, you have the opportunity to focus on what you really love. And it's because of these new platforms that take care of the friction, the doing all the stuff you didn't want to do, right? Because they're matching you up with the work on a global scale, right? So I will say in the US, our freelance opportunities are less than anywhere else in the world, right? Because we have to take care of our own healthcare, and we have to actually match the wages we have here in the U.S., which are some of the highest in the world, right? And so, at a very time where there's this massive shift, and there's that same study shows that by 2027, it's very possible that there will be more freelance workers than there will be core workers in the organizations. And when that happens, over the next 6, 7, 8 years, the U.S. is the workforce is going to really not be as competitive, which should be something people need to be talking about.
Yeah, and kind of to that point, that's part of the reason why people that want to kind of dip their toe in the water and get into freelancing, a lot of people moonlight. And in that same study that Upwork put out, you can see that there's a ton of people moonlighting that do work on nights and weekends. I mean, my wife's uncle was a prime example. He worked at a big defense contractor, and nights and weekends, he, did contract work. He was an EE, electrical engineer, and he paid for both his kids to go to college that way. So there are those people that are like, hey, I like the comfort. I like the full-time job that I have, but I can pick up work on my nights and weekends. And through our platform, you can do that as well. That's kind of part of the benefit. But to your point, I mean, this is the emerging trend. This is where things are going. And it's better to try and, figure out the different ways that you can get involved. And again, for us, we're looking at the design challenges for those people that want to build a portfolio. Because one of the questions that we get most frequently when people come to our platform is like, hey, how do I establish myself? Because if I go to some of these other platforms and I don't have an established kind of name or brand, it's hard for me to find work. You go to Fiverr, for example, you go on there and it's top rated people, and all these other different mechanisms. But it's like, how do you build that? Here in the States, most people are like, oh, well, I got to, drop my pants. It's a race to the bottom on some of these, just because, again, to your point, like SamaSource and some of these other places, people are solving these problems and becoming freelancers because they have lower cost of living and it's easier for them. So one of the things that we've started to think about to try and introduce more people into freelancing here is, all right, number one, moonlighting. And then number two, to help build that portfolio. That's why we're trying to come up with, what's some unique design challenges and some unique ways that we can address this problem of getting people the access to the information and access to building their portfolio. So that way they can stand out. So Yehya, that was kind of the point in the initial question you have when you said you're playing devil's advocate, is with some of these challenges, what's the benefit if I don't win the challenge? To Steve's point, the benefit and the way that we're looking at this is a way for you to kind of build that digital portfolio. If you already have an established resume, you're a PE or whatever the case might be, cool. Like that's a good way for you to enter in some of these conversations. However, a majority of the platforms out there are based off a rating system or other things. And we're looking at challenges as a way for people to stand out and say, here's what I can bring to the table. We're even rolling out like community-based challenges where people can just, put stuff out there to the crowd, to each other, more like a Quora type of system that we're rolling out in the platform here pretty soon. Again, just to help facilitate that collaborative economy and really get ahead of the trends that Steve is talking about.
I'm just going to say, absolutely, I agree with the whole mentality. I presented the devil's advocate approach or the devil's advocate comment simply because I want to consider the approach from both ways. I am like you shared, I'm trying to get into consulting myself. So I understand that this is where the economy is going. But we always have to think about the unintended consequences of such direction.
100%. Yeah, again, when I launched this platform and the concept initially, for me, it was during the last turn of the economy and the recession. I've sold CAD software for a number of years, and people were coming to me that were out of work, like, hey, Bassanio, I know you sell software to all these different companies. Let me know any companies that are hiring from an independent consultant standpoint. And then there was a few of them that were like, I'm interested in kind of taking this leap. Can you talk to me, any companies that are looking for work? And inevitably what ended up happening is some of those people found work and it was challenging, and some didn't. But a couple use cases of people that I kind of referred work to started out where, they were struggling to get by. And next thing you know, they're doing enough work to sustain themselves. And you fast forward to today, they have a small firm of maybe 5 to 6 other engineers working with them because they were able to pick up enough work for companies that maybe just want to outsource and crowdsource innovation and use freelancers or use an independent consulting firm. So Yehya, to your point of, playing the devil's advocate, I think that I'm happy you brought that up because that's a common question and common point that we get from a ton of people that come to our site. I mean, Harvard Business Review put out a report a few years back saying, close to 75% of freelance work still comes word of mouth. And I think that that's especially true here in the States. And if you start getting into the more highly technical, highly specialized fields, yourself going out there as a continuous improvement consultant in Six Sigma and with your background and with your experience, probably closer to 90% of your work initially is going to come word of mouth. But we're trying to, again, play a role with a lot of the other companies out there trying to do this in our space, in our realm. How can we help facilitate this here in the States in a few unique ways? So I know we're getting tight on time here, but I wanted to just ask a few more questions. Thanks for bearing with us, guys. But Yehya, specifically to you, one point I wanted to go back to was you talked about leveraging, obviously we know SpaceX isn't bringing in outside ideas and putting their knowledge out there. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is getting unique ideas from diverse groups. And you kind of hinted at that. And I want you to dive a little deeper into it, where there's times where you guys have challenges and, do you have any examples you can share where someone within the organization and maybe a different group brought a different perspective forward that really helped shape the way that you thought about things or maybe improved the specific process or part of a project? It sounds like you were hinting at that. So can you kind of shed some light on that really quickly?
So yeah, sure. Happy to answer that. But before I do that, I just want to clarify real quick that you stated SpaceX is not seeking external experience. I'm just, what I said is not to my knowledge that it is seeking external or crowdsourcing. It could be doing it. That's something definitely for SpaceX to answer. But I just answered from my knowledge, not as a fact. Now that we clarified that, in terms of, I'll give you just a simple example of how different perspective gives you different, or could lead you down the right path. And that example was one of the projects we're doing, again, without getting into too much details. We were on a clean line and we were trying to measure the particles in the air. We're trying to minimize that as part of the clean line environment. And we did some testing and we measured it. We plotted across the hours of the day. And as an engineer, as a continuous improvement specialist, we're looking at the trends. I, for one, was looking for patterns. The other, engineer was looking for what could be causing particles. And then when we presented that, it was the leader of that area. When we showed him that the data, he looked at it and he says, "Wait a second, your levels are 100% overlapping with our shift patterns. It's people. People come in the clean room and bring in particles. And for the life of me, I would have never guessed that. I would have looked at every filter in the room. I would have looked at every part. I would have never looked at the people. But the fact that this person was responsible, obviously he was the leader of the area, he was responsible for the shift patterns and the working hours. It was obvious for them because they've seen this shape before. So that's just a quick example of how different perspective can add 2 and 2 together, like Steve mentioned earlier.
Great. Again, same thing. I didn't take myself off mute. So appreciate that sentiment there. And I think that's, again, when you talk about democratizing innovation, it's those unique perspectives that other people have. And it's really going to give you some guidance and feedback going forward, I think, in the future economy, where you can start to leverage and rely on people from different backgrounds, different expertise, because maybe they just have a nugget of wisdom that you weren't privy to. So I think that's something that's useful. Steve, one last question for you here is, tell me where more independent consultants, freelancers, companies that are looking to get involved with these NASA crowdsource challenges, where can they go to find some of these challenges? Who should they contact? Is it directly going through some of these other companies that you're leveraging? And I'm not expecting to go and shout out all the companies, but just, tell people how they can get involved.
Absolutely. No, that's a great question. So at NASA, we have a whole suite of crowdsourcing activities. I work in the NASA Tournament Lab, or that's our public-facing brand. And for all NASA Tournament Lab challenges, we use what we call curated crowds. So we use companies that are like yours, right, where we have contracts with them, or sometimes we can actually use a purchase card without a contract. And so we have access, like I say, to 16 different crowds, which is about 70 million people, and we're looking to increase that. So we have a contract effort going on, a procurement effort going on over the next year that'll probably bring in a few more. And we'll also be expanding the use of our purchase card to try to really use the full range of those communities. We also have our Centennial Challenges, which is our multi-million-dollar challenges that work over multiple years. Those are kind of like the X Prize challenges, if you're familiar with like the self-driving car and the first commercial humans in space, all of those kinds of challenges. And those typically are where you're trying to get a whole team together, and it's academia and startups and corporate all coming together to build and advance a larger system technology. And in fact, we just had our automated 3D habitat printing challenge for Mars just this last week, and we're able to get some really amazing 3D printed third scale designs printed by those teams. We also have citizen science, so on sites like Zooniverse and others, where we'll put large data sets of imagery or different data sets, and people that are interested in that can help and get trained on that. And then we also have the world's largest hackathon, hopefully some people are familiar with already, called the International Space Apps Hackathon. And that's held once a year and has literally thousands and thousands of people all around the world participating. All of those challenges, and then there's some education challenges as well. All of those challenges and activities we post on the nasa.gov/solve site. And so any of those challenges, if you want to see what NASA is doing with crowdsourcing with challenges, we will post them on nasa.gov/solve. We also post all government challenges on challenge.gov. And so, like I say, we actually currently have a challenge with Homeland Security that they're using one of our vendors, Luminary Labs, to run a challenge on detecting opioids in the mail stream. We did another one with Homeland Security a few months ago on Kaggle, looking at the algorithm for the millimeter wave scanners in airports, and got some amazing results out of those. We're working with VA, with SOCOM in the military. We work with Department of Energy, NIST. It goes on and on. And so those challenges are all listed on challenge.gov, but they also are all running challenges in other agencies as well. So there's literally hundreds of challenges going on all the time to try to help people do things at various levels. We have some that are big team, big $1 million challenges, and others that are small. We're looking for a graphic for a couple $100. And even when we offer just a little bit of money, it's interesting because the people that compete on those challenges and win those challenges can then say, hey, we've provided a service to NASA and they were highly satisfied. And that feeds that portfolio that then hopefully helps them to get work. And in fact, there was a study on freelancer.com that Sarah Tang did, where she actually found that freelancers that had won a NASA challenge were making about 30% more than their peers because of that experience. So we hopefully are giving back in that way. But again, innovation challenges and contests really aren't all about the money. They're often about reputation and proving yourself. We talk about the 4 Gs of crowd incentives, gold, guts, glory, and good. And those tend to be the incentives of crowdsourcing. People often want to make some money, but they often want to make a difference, or they want to prove themselves, or actually do some good and give back. So kind of interesting.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And you want to take a second too. I see that you're a part of Open Assembly. Do you want to kind of take a second and talk a little bit about that? And then we'll get another parting piece of guidance from Yehya, and then we'll wrap up.
Sure. Yeah, Open Assembly is an interesting group that we've been working with recently through our relationship with Harvard Business School and their Laboratory for Innovation Sciences at Harvard, or LISH as we call them. And they're working through various platforms to engage crowds, right? To different crowdsourcing vendors, so that we're all on the same page. We're all kind of working together on, and not necessarily all just competing, but working together to really start to address things like portability of reputation and fairness and the way crowds need to work for the greater good. But then also the Open Assembly groups reaching out to large enterprises like NASA, like GE, like Deloitte. And some of these organizations, we're talking a lot in our conversations about how do we educate industry on how these tools work and how effective they are and how they pivot. We kind of see this as a race condition, right? So we need to get more people on board with this if we're going to really pivot the workforce before automation starts to take wide swaths of jobs. And the best way to counter that, I think, is going to be a flexible workforce that's doing lifelong learning. And that's just now getting started. So there's that piece of it too that I think you'll see a lot of. And there's a lot of articles that come out of Open Assembly that deal with the future of work and what has to happen there. That includes, Microsoft. Paul Estes is leading the charge there. Diane Finkhausen, who worked for GE and their innovation program. Balaji Bandeli, who's coming out of Deloitte's Pixel program. So there's a lot of really great stuff going on there, and it's hopefully going to help propel some of this stuff into the mainstream more than it is.
Yeah. You connected me with John Windsor, and I appreciate that. Got some insightful conversations with him in the past.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Yeah, good guy for sure. Yeah. So one parting piece of guidance that you'll leave people with respect to, if you're going to approach continuous improvement, Six Sigma, and really trying to find ways to optimize processes and workflows to really cater towards innovation, what would be the one parting piece of guidance, if you can break it down for someone? And then I also want you to share how people can reach out to you directly, because maybe that path to that parting piece of guidance is like, hey, surround yourself with someone that's an expert. And obviously you've proven that. So share that parting piece of guidance and then how people can reach out to you directly.
Sure. Thank you for that, Sonny. So my first thing is, it is not an option. My piece of guidance is continuous improvement, and improving yourself is not an option. It's a way of life and survival. There is the famous quote that's attributed to Darwin, who said, "It's not the strongest of the species, nor the most intelligent that will survive, but it's the most adaptable to change." And life is changing, so it's a matter of whether you will adapt to the change or you will not. So that would be kind of the punchline there. The second piece of that is, when you adapt to change, say by adopting or embracing continuous improvement, embrace the philosophy most of all, not necessarily the tools, because the tools change. Steve talked about the moment somebody is hired into a role, they stop the learning process. Same with continuous improvement tools, and same pretty much with everything else. So embrace the philosophy, because the philosophy does not change much. It is, you are always striving to improve yourself by understanding where you are, where you need to be, and what are the best tools or approaches or activities that you need to do at that given time that will get you where you need to be. And what got you there yesterday isn't necessarily getting you there tomorrow. So you always have to hence continuous improvement. You have to always improve yourself, further your learning. It's an ongoing journey. It's a lifelong learning journey, like Steve mentioned. Those would be my two cents and my parting pieces of guidance. Definitely, if you'd like to give me a comment on this podcast, or if you want to share with me a problem you're facing, the easiest way to reach me is through LinkedIn. Yehya ElMaraghi, Yehya, and then last name is ElMaraghi. I'm happy to share my email address and whatnot if requested. But the easiest way is to connect with me through LinkedIn. This is where I'm most active. I'm always happy to have a good discussion or look at an opportunity there. Other than that, I really enjoy the conversation. Steve's experience is outstanding, and the insights you've provided is great. Bassanio, your facilitation and managing the discussion was fantastic. So thank you for making me part of this.
Absolutely. And we'll have your LinkedIn information in the show notes. So that way, if anybody wants to reach out to you directly, if you're listening to this now, just head down to our show notes and comments, and we'll be able to have Yahya's information in there. One last point, one last thing, Steve, one book that you can recommend for those interested in crowdsourcing. I think you mentioned one earlier, but if anyone who wants to soak up more knowledge on the crowd, and I think you mentioned a book that made you like, all right, listen, I have to embrace this. I have to learn more about it after you read it. Book you would like to recommend?
There's one called that's recent called Machine Platform Crowd and Harnessing Our Digital Future. And that one is by Andrew McAfee and Eric, I don't know if I can say his name, Brynjolfsson. I probably butchered that. That one I just finished not too long ago, and it is really good about not just talking about the crowd, but the role of AI and how platforms and how all this is working together, the future of work. The Jeff Howe book, if you don't know Jeff Howe, he used to be the editor at Wired, and he was the one that supposedly coined the term crowdsourcing. His book, Crowdsourcing, is a really good primer. It's about 10 years old now, so but I still think it's a great book. So yeah, those would be the ones I would recommend.
All right, great. And then Yahya, same thing. What would be one book you would recommend for someone that wants to do a little bit more research? Because like you said, it's really the philosophy and methodology, not the acronyms and the different processes, but it's more the philosophy. So what would be a good book that you could potentially recommend philosophy-wise? And same thing, we'll put both of these recommendations in the show notes as well for the listeners.
Absolutely. So I actually have two books that I'd like to share. One of which has to do with my industry as Six Sigma. It's called How to Measure Anything. So that book explains how a lot of the things that seem untangible, we can actually measure. So it was the first book where I actually came across the word crowdsourcing, where they said even with gambling industries, they would take the gambling or take the crowd direction in one way or the other and use it for gambling. And they believe that if people are willing to bet their money on a fact or on an event, that it is more likely to happen. So that is a cool book to learn how to measure, say, anything. There's another book that was the core of my kind of interest in Six Sigma, was Understanding Variation, the Key to Managing Chaos, by Dr. Donald Wheeler. That is simply a very short read on how we should be looking at trends versus snapshot in time. So how is variation a piece of our life, and how do we deal with it, and the way we should look at it. If I had to recommend one book, it would be this book. It's a very short, easy read. Donald Wheeler have a very cool kind of sarcastic style, so I appreciate it. And I don't think you will regret reading that one.
Great. Well, again, gentlemen, I can't thank you guys enough. This is a very insightful conversation. Happy I was able to get the both of you on. Thanks for being flexible and making this work. To the audience, again, if you want to reach out to either one of these gentlemen, we'll have their LinkedIn handles in the show notes, book recommendations. Again, cheers to the future economy. I think we're all heading in the right direction here, and the sooner that we can all start working more closely together on challenges that face us, the better off we all are. So again, thanks again, Steve. Thanks again, Yehya, and look forward to talking to you guys here again pretty soon.
Likewise. Thank you. And pleasure's all mine.
Thanks, Bizanyo. Great to meet you, Yehya.
Cheers.